Alright. Hello again, Avengers, and welcome to another exciting daily vlog. This is number 19. And due to the fact that yesterday we talked about TTRPG game design stuff, I want to continue talking about it because I don't have anything currently happening in the world that I am passionate enough about that I want to make a daily vlog about it. So let's talk about race. And by that, I mean the fantasy races that in every RPG imaginable that allow you to create a character, you will normally choose at least a race and a class. And that's how it's been forever, except in original D&D, where your race was your class. But ever since Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, I think, is when they first started adding races and classes. It has been a part of the D&D lexicon, and different RPGs treat it differently, but the kind of standard is your race will give you some sort of benefit, and generally one of the benefits is it will give you a bonus to one of your stats. And then depending on the iteration of RPG you're talking about, there may be other things. There may be particular abilities that are tied to your race that you can use that other people can't. Like in D&D, Dragonborn have a fire breath, or a breath weapon at attack. It's not always fire. They have a breath weapon at attack. Or elves have training that lets them use, I think it's long swords and long bows, just as a racial feature. And yeah, like it's kind of just universally accepted that if you're going to have multiple fantastical races, which has nothing to do with the artificial construct that race is in the real world, where for the most part it's not really a real thing, and is mostly visual and societal constructs. No, this is talking about kind of the difference between elves are, biologically different than dwarves. And it comes from Tolkien and other kind of fantasy works like that, but mostly from Tolkien, where the elves and the dwarves were very, very different. Elves were extremely long-lived, and they had this, incredible, uncanny accuracy and finesse, whereas dwarves were more short-lived, but they were stocky and massively strong and had this huge endurance. And then humans were humans, unless they were the Dunedain. And then they were kind of like half-elves, but they didn't get the cool pointy ears. So that's kind of where it started. And when you look at other expressions of kind of the fantasy races and tropes, like if you look at Shadowrun, orcs play differently than elves and play differently than humans and the other stuff. I'm not super up to date on Shadowrun anymore. Or one of my favorite book series, there's an author named Raymond E. Feist, and he wrote a book series based on a world of his own creation called Medchemia. Now, the interesting thing about the Medchemia books is that was actually his custom D&D setting. That was his homebrew D&D setting, though I don't think they actually used D&D, but it was his RPG setting before he started writing books way back in the 80s. And so it went from RPG setting to book setting, and then he's written like 30 some odd books. And I've read almost all of them. I think there's like 3 books of his in the Medchemia books that I haven't read. But they're absolutely my favorite author is Raymond E. Feist. And he goes into kind of really specific detail about kind of the differences between humans and elves and dwarves. Like one of my favorite examples that has always kind of stuck to me as far as how I envision dwarves is the idea that dwarves in Medchemia just have this unbelievably strong constitution and fortitude. And so they describe this time where dwarves were coming to reinforce a battle, and they double time marched for something like a week to get there, barely sleeping, if at all. And then as soon as they got there, they immediately joined into the fight without taking a break, without that, and they were still battle ready after effectively running for a week. They still were able to come in and beat off and destroy the bad guys without fail, because that's what dwarves do. They're just these unbelievably like endurance-based race, and that's what makes them unique. The elves had their own thing. They had this kind of relationship with magic in Medkemia, and they were still like the Super Rangers, which is a fantasy trope at this point where they use bows and stuff. But elves had their own kind of magic that made them kind of immortal, and the whole Medkemia saga is really, really fascinating because I'm about to sneeze. Or not. The whole Medkemia world is really, really interesting because they have basically two kinds of magic. You have the lesser path and the greater path, and on Medkemia, magicians only knew the lesser path, which is actually extremely similar to what D&D magic is, which was basically, it was kind of ritual based, and so you would have to have all the material components, and you would have to say the right words and things like that. And then greater path magic was actually a little bit more akin to maybe sorcerer magic, where they didn't need to do rituals, they didn't need material components, they just invoked the magic with their own kind of magical ability. So anyway, really interesting stuff. And then when you start getting away from like fantasy based stuff, you still have things like in other RPGs they're sometimes called lineages, or if we look at something like the Essence 20 system, you have origins, but they're all this idea of basically your job, which is your class, is only one part of what makes your character unique. And having races or origins or lineages or whatever you want to call them that feel impactful are going to change how you play your character. And again, I think this is something that original 5th edition D&D did relatively poorly. Because if you look at D&D 5e, the Player's Handbook, the original Player's Handbook, most of the benefits you got from your race, you very rarely use them much at all after character creation and maybe your first couple levels. Like the Dragonborn breath attack was so underpowered and so limited that 9 times out of 10 you would never use it in combat because you always had something better that you could do. The weapon proficiencies for elves really wasn't that beneficial because a lot of times you could get those weapon proficiencies. Like if you were going to be using a longsword, you probably were going to be playing a class that already gave you proficiency in that. It's not like 3rd or 4th edition where there was just shit tons of weapons that you couldn't use without taking a feat or having something that gave you a benefit in them. You only have simple weapons, which everyone can use, and martial weapons, which most martial classes can use. So you really, for the most part, didn't get individual proficiencies. And so when they updated with Monsters of the Multiverse, they started creating racial abilities, your lineage abilities, that were actually useful throughout most of the game. Like my personal favorite, they switched up how Eladrin worked. Old school Eladrin, which first basically appeared in the Dungeon Master's Guide as an example of how to create a new race or a new subrace. they could cast the Misty Step spell once per day. And that really wasn't that useful. And it also, it was meant to mimic the ability that they had in 4th edition, which was they got an encounter power called Phase Step. And it was really, really fun. It's one of the reasons that Eladrin were my favorite character type, or character race in 4th edition, was because Phase Step was unbelievably useful. It was an encounter power. So literally all you had to do was take a short rest to get it back, and a short rest was 5 minutes in D&D for the 4th edition. So not only could you use it every single combat, but you could use it in between combat as long as you go, hey guys, can we take 5 minutes? So it was just this incredibly useful ability, and the 5th edition version of it just sucked. However, when we go to Monsters of the Multiverse, they changed it from being able to cast a spell, which gives you limitations because it's a spell, so it can be countered, and it has verbal components, so if you're silenced or have something preventing you from speaking, you can't use it, and all these other things, to just giving them a Phase Step power. And the old one was you could cast it once per day for free, and then you had to waste spell slots. But the new version was you could use this Phase Step power, which is now just an ability, not a spell, and you could use it a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus. So it became more useful as you leveled up because you could use it more often. And once you hit level 3, there was an additional benefit based on the season, because Eladrin, at least in 5th edition, are linked to a season. Spring, summer, autumn, winter. And each one has a different thing. Like the summer version, when you teleport, you can set people on fire. The autumn version, when you teleport or when you Phase Step, you can charm people. I think, if I remember correctly, the winter version made them afraid of you, and I can't remember what spring does at the top of my head. But those are actually really useful, and it meant that if you are playing a Monsters of the Multiverse version of Eladrin, you are going to feel different than a character playing the exact same class with the exact same background, with the exact same subclass. You're still going to feel different because you have this teleportation power. And for me, that is what good origin, lineage, whatever design is it should be something that makes you feel unique, other than, ooh, I have pointy ears. And it's going to make you feel different than a high elf, and it's going to make you feel different than a wood elf. And so I think that is good lineage design, just to avoid using that word because there's so much kind of baggage that's attached to it. And so in an RPG that uses what has now become fairly standard, which is race, class, background, for the lineage, you need to come up with something more than just, oh, here's some extra bonuses, especially if you go the route of D&D for the 5th edition, where now you actually don't get lineage bonuses to... Thank you, phone. You actually don't get lineage bonuses to your attributes scores. I mean, you do, but they're not actually attached to your lineage. You just get to pick what you want, which for me is not a bad thing. I actually enjoy that. It means that I can create... because it used to be... especially for Eladrin generally would have dexterity and intelligence, tended to be the things that they were best at, which meant if you wanted to play a strength-based character, neither one of those was going to be useful for you. So if you wanted to be like an Eladrin Eldritch Knight, the intelligence would be useful, the dexterity, not particularly well. You know, if you're going to be going Eldritch Knight, you can be a dexterity-based fighter, and there's a lot of different ways to do that, but 9 times out of 10, Eldritch Knights just tend to benefit more from a strength base, because then they can wear heavy armor and they can use shields, and then they can use the shield spell, and they become impossible to hit. They're actually a lot of fun to play if you want to play a really, really tanky class with some cool magic shit that you can do. But that meant playing an Eladrin Eldritch Knight just really wasn't a good fit, and now you can. I actually, the character I'm creating for, or that I have created, I haven't had a chance to play it yet. for this new campaign that I get to play in is an Eladrin Ranger. And is heavily wisdom based, which I like. I think is a lot of fun, and so that meant that I needed to have bonuses to wisdom in order to do that, because Rangers use wisdom for their spellcasting. I'm actually kind of leaning significantly more heavily into the spellcasting aspect of the Ranger, which for anyone that knows D&D 5th edition, you know that that's not a smart thing to do, because Ranger casting sucks and they're half-casters, but I've created a weird character, which is what I do, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun to play. Yeah, one of the other things that I think works even better is bringing up Essence 20. Essence 20, their lineage or race or whatever you want to call it, they're called Origins in that. And their Origins, because of how the system is built, the Origins themselves work really, really well no matter what level you are. To give you an example, for the Athletic Origin, this is the first Origin. The Origin benefit, again, you do get Essence score increases. So you do get attribute increases built into it. And it actually gives you your starting health as well. So there are physical aspects tied to the Origins, just like the old races in like D&D used to be. But you also get an Origin benefit with each one. The Athletic Origin benefit, when making a strength or speed-based skill check at a skill you do not possess levels in, you still roll a D2 skill die and do not suffer a snag for being untrained. That's a really, really big deal. It means that any strength or speed-based skill you can roll and actually do OKK in. Normally, if you try to use a skill that you don't have any levels in the Essence to 20 system, you roll it without any skill dice, which is rough, and you roll it with a snag, which is their version of disadvantage. So you roll 2d20s, take the lower of the two numbers, which means you're not going to be doing particularly well. A d2 is just a coin flip. So it's not like you're adding a massive number to it, but it does mean if you can somehow get an upshift, you're going from a d2 to a d4 instead of a snag to a D2 or something like that. So like it's a really, really useful thing, and it means that you as a character can try a lot more things while still being able to specialize your character into, or you as a player can still specialize your character into being very good at a few things, but then still able to do other things without just being completely screwed over. If we look at the brainy benefit, you have a vast array of knowledge that you've accumulated over the years, and occasionally you might know a little bit about something useful in nearly any situation. In a situation where you or your allies are stumped, you can always spend one story point from your pool to get a clue from the GM. That's a really, really big deal. It's basically anytime you get into a situation where you're like, we got nothing, you can just go, hey, story point, give us a clue. And there isn't a situation where that's not going to be useful. And the acquisition of story points is something that shouldn't be particularly difficult to get in the Essence to 20 system. Like, it's one of the ways you're supposed to reward your players. So, yeah, I think the Essence 20 system does Lineage, or Origins is what they could call it, probably better than almost any other RPG I've seen. The Pathfinder 2nd edition tries to make your choice of race or lineage, I can't remember what they call them in that. I can look it up. I mean, as long as I'm talking about an RPG that I really don't like, I might as well get things right. So Pathfinder core rulebook. What do you guys call it? Ancestries. That's what they call them. So, ancestries are their version of lineages. And, yeah, I know. Sorry, Acrobat is annoying the hell out of me. because they changed. They updated my Acrobat and they changed the interface, which is fine. I actually think the new interface looks really, really good. However, the bookmarks used to be on the left-hand side, and now they're on the right-hand side, and I can't move them back, which is monumentally stupid. Because we know they can go over there because they just were. So I don't understand why I can't move a toolbar from one side of the screen to the other, where literally any other product I could do that in and have no problem. So that's pissing me off right now, and I want to attack Adobe for that. But that being said, they do this thing where as you level up, because they're massively overly complicated and over-designed, as you level up, you get a number of different feats. You get class feats, you get ancestry feats, you get background feats. Like every single thing has a different version of a feat that you can use. And it's annoying as hell, but it does mean that as you level up, the ancestry that you chose actually matters. Whereas, again, in D&D 5th edition, even with the new Monsters of the Multiverse versions of them, you can still kind of pick your race and pick your background and then never use them again. And to me, that's bad design. Now, the backgrounds, the reason that people didn't use the backgrounds, the original version of backgrounds in 5th edition, which I'll talk about tomorrow, were significantly better than anyone gave them credit to, and Wizards of the Coast just decided to abandon the idea of background abilities and just give them feats, which is stupid, and also means that unless you're using one of the feat trees that I despise, you're going to forget about your the feat that you got with your background probably by about level 3 or 4. So, yeah. But to me, that is good game design, is if your origin or lineage or ancestry or whatever you call it, if that aspect of your character creation matters throughout the entire life of the character, as opposed to just being, oh, this is how I get a few extra points in one of my attributes and maybe, higher hit points in the beginning of the game, and then it never comes up again. Your lineage should not be a purely role-playing focused thing. There should be mechanical benefits that make things feel different and make things play differently. And so, yeah, I find that interesting. And again, even with an RPG that I'm not particularly fond of, I can admit that they at least attempted to do ancestries better than 5th edition. 4th edition, the ancestry stuff is still freaking awesome. 4th edition, to me, was peak D&D. I know people will argue with me about this, mostly because they either haven't played it or played with a really, really bad dungeon master. 4th edition was peak D&D. It didn't try to it didn't try to kind of transcend what an RPG was. It was an RPG, and it was fun as hell to play. And it had so many different tools that made it easy to DM, especially compared to 5th edition. 5th edition can be a pain in the ass to DM sometimes. And then in other situations, it can be super, super easy. The advantage-disadvantage system is massively nice. But now that I've played a lot of different RPGs, I can kind of see the limitations to it. Mostly because there's a lot of other RPGs that use advantage-disadvantage, and then also give you other tools. So, yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to kind of bring up, and again, I'm in this kind of game design mood where I want to be talking about this stuff. So, I hope you guys are finding this interesting, because to me, this is fascinating stuff. This is the stuff that I really enjoy. It's the stuff that when I start doing a Discovering New Dragons, like the pre-work before I start recording the episode, and I start picking out which RPG that I want to focus on. This is stuff that I'm looking at. I'm like, okay, well, how does your lineage system work? How does your background system work? Do you have a background system? Or are you like second edition D&D where it's just race and class? Yeah. For anyone still listening, in the comments, I would like to know: do you know an RPG, a TTRPG, where you feel that the lineage system, whatever you want to call it, works particularly well, and specifically is something that matters after character creation? Because again, there are a lot of RPGs where it is simply something that you do at character creation and then you never think about it again, unless it's something that is heavily factored into your role playing. So yeah, let me know any RPGs like that in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, that is all for me today, and I will see you guys next time. All right, bye bye.